Hello everyone, dear friends. We continue our fascinating case in the RealGuide program. In the previous lesson we did the setup in the all-on-6 style, talked about WhatsApp, discussed pin fixation, and now we are going to move on to actually creating templates. And as I already mentioned, here we will be working with bone. Previously this used to be somewhat complicated because in order to work with bone you needed to create a 3D model of the bone. And in earlier versions of RealGuide, well, in the very first ones, this feature didn't exist at all. Later a bone segmentation option was added, but it had to be done manually. Now there's been a huge breakthrough. The developers of this program have implemented AI-powered segmentation in the segmentation module. Big respect to them. I mean, it's not like I'm advertising for them, but credit where credit is due, ahem. To switch to the segmentation module, there's this magic wand here called segmentation. I want to point out right away that here you can segment crowns on the scan, segment teeth in other words, extract teeth from the CT scan. This is sometimes necessary for auto-transplantation, or you can segment the bone. In our case, right now we need the segmented bone, so we click on bone. Well, sorry for the spoiler. For some reason I already have it here. Here it is. So here we have the jaw. Now I'll click preview step. There, that's it. This is the screen you should see at the very beginning, just like I do. Actually, everything is pretty simple. The program uses default settings here, which I don't recommend changing. Here they're actually set up very well, configured, and everything is pretty straightforward. So the window we're working in is this one right here. We have three options, include teeth. If we click this option, the program will segment the 3D model with the teeth. In this particular case, we need to segment without the teeth. So basically, right now, if you click segment mandible or segment maxilla, the program will simply segment these, just create an STL from the CT scan. And that's it. But since in our case we're planning to extract the teeth at the same time, we need to turn this option off. And the program will then, to put it simply, understand where the bone is and where the teeth are. Please note that this option must be turned off. We click segment mandible because we are working on the lower jaw. And this is what you should end up with. You can see if we hide the CT scan now, you can see that the program has segmented the lower jaw without the teeth. This is very useful and very fast. Next, we move to the window where we can remove any unnecessary parts. But for now, we can leave it as is. Click Finalize. Here, we agree to everything, because the program asks us to confirm all of this and so on. That's it, basically. This is the window where we continue working. Next, as I already mentioned, we will be making two templates. Let's talk in more detail about the sequence of steps and the purpose of each one. The first template we will create is a template for fixation pins. The idea is that we have teeth. Teeth are a very useful thing because they make it really easy to align not only the CT scan and the mucosa, but also to orient the fixation pins relative to the bone. Accordingly, what we'll do here is create a single template, an on-teeth template like this, which will contain just two fixation pins. These fixation pins will be placed according to the teeth, and the holes in the bone for these fixation pins will remain after the teeth are removed, they won't disappear, dissolve, or, I don't know, undergo any kind of resorption. In other words, everything will stay exactly as it is. So accordingly, the teeth are removed, then the mucoperiosteal flap is reflected, and the surgical guide is placed using these very fixation pins. Let's go step by step, discussing what we're doing as we go along. Okay, so first we need to switch to guide design. Here the program warns us that there are sleeves that are not included in our project, but we don't need them right now. We set the insertion path, remembering about undercuts. We've talked about them a million times already. That's it. We've done that. And now we can see here are our 3 sleeves. Now we click next step. And here I'd like to draw your attention to something. This is very important. And by the way, it's a really great feature of this program. If you need to create a template and not include implants or fixation pins at a certain stage in this template, you can simply click on the number of that template loops, the number of that pin, or the number of that implant, whichever you need. And in this case, the number will appear white. So for example, I have for well, for some reason it doesn't increase, right? So 4, 6, 4, 4, 4, 2, 3, 2, 3, 3, 3, 4, 3, 6, I make this white, right? If they're highlighted in white, it means they won't be included in this template. And now we have this pin here, which is called pin A. The thing is, I would also like to turn it off. I'll explain why in a moment. It's because when we create the template, when we make the template like this, we don't know if it will fit or not, since the scan is done in such a way that we can't see where the transition fold ends. In other words, if the transition fold ended here, then we would place this pin. And since we can't see it, we don't know how to do all of this. Here, we can see that the mucosa goes here and the mucosa goes here as well. That means the template will fit and everything will most likely be fine with it. Ahem. And it's also important to understand that even though this template is a positioning one, yes, meaning this template will essentially position 2 fixation pins, the surgeon will simply need to reflect the tissue and find these 2 holes at the next stage after tooth extraction, fit them and in the 3rd ST, and as it were in the surgical template, this fixation pin will be there. But let's go through everything step by step. Let's first actually create the boundary of this template. Let's create the boundary of the template. Let's create the boundary of the template. We also trace the boundary of the template along the clinical necks. No more, no less. We click Create Guide and see what we got. And we see that we didn't include all the implants in the design that we had turned off, and the pin wasn't included either. Accordingly, we smooth out this part, we smooth everything out, remove everything unnecessary, we reinforce the pin in the necessary areas. And the necessary areas are the transition points of any sleeve to the main body of the template. And also, since the template is tooth supported, the golden rule applies. If the template is tooth supported, you need windows for seating. We make these windows approximately 8 or 9 millimeters in size, in diameter. We make 1, we make 2. These protruding edges can also be smoothed out a little. Let me remind those who may not have watched the previous video about windows that windows are necessary, they control the fit. And well, most often we simply make these kinds of vestibular windows specifically on the vestibular side because as a surgeon, I can say they are the most convenient in terms of visualization. Because if, for example, we made a window like this, let me show you, as I often see people do, something like this. Well, of course it looks cool, but you can't actually see anything. So whether it fits or not is unclear. Whether it's seated or not is unclear. But here you can clearly see this contour from the vestibular side. That is, you can look from one side and from the other. That's it. Well, in the window area, we also usually add a little plastic so that the design of the template does not suffer. That is, God forbid it does not break or anything like that. That's all. Everything is fine. Nothing is interfering with anything anywhere. Here too will trim a little bit because it might come into contact with the mucosa. Well, if anything, it will just press against it. Nothing bad will happen. But still, just so as not to stress yourself or others, it's better to remove. Okay, we click next step. And now, once again, why didn't we include this pin? Maybe someone didn't understand. I'll repeat, this is important. And what do we do about it? We didn't include it because we don't have information about where the vestibular fold ends. That's just how the scan is. There's nothing we can do about it. But will it be a mistake that we have 3 sleeves for fixation pins at the next stage when we make the template, while here there are only 2? The thing is, these sleeves for the fixation pins that we are making, and in general this template for the fixation pins that we are making, it's only meant to set the correct position of the fixation pins relative to the bone. In other words, so that these holes in the bone are at the angle and at the distance that we planned in the program. That's why if this, so here you also need to understand, yes, I lost my train of thought a bit. So here you need to understand that at this stage, there won't be any support on these fixation pins because, well, we won't be drilling through this fixation pin template. But at the next stage, we will add an additional pin, meaning the next template will be aligned to the bone using these 2 pins, and then we'll be able to drill the 3rd pin after the teeth are removed. It's all pretty simple. And then the load will be distributed evenly and everything should turn out great. Now, in fact, we no longer need this anatomical model. By the way, we can export this pin guide template. That is, we can click export guide for milling, for example, and so on and so forth. Right here on this tab, and accordingly send this template for printing. This is our first template that will be used in this case. And now we need to work on the second template. To work on the second template, the first thing we need to do here is place the sleeves. Since our template will be bone supported, as we agreed, we need to orient the sleeves not relative to the anatomical model anymore, but relative to the bone. This is very important because, as you are probably aware, when we talk about sleeves, we usually think of the offset, and now the offset will be determined not by the mucosa, but in actuality by the level of the bone itself. Basically, this working area can already be left as it is. There you go. That's the first point I wanted to mention here. Well, as for segmentation, I'll talk about that a bit later when we actually start making the template. Let's place the sleeves. To do this, we go to the Implant Planning tab, select the sleeve again with change. It lags a bit for me when the library is loading. Here, by the way, I can see that this isn't a very good position, so I need to change it. And now we need to select the sleeves. Let me remind you once again that the sleeves are linked to the navigation kit. Right now, I've selected the RealGuide kit, so I have the RealGuide sleeve. Not because my implant is like that, but because my kit is like that. That's important. Please, don't forget about this. Now, let's select here again. Yes, right now my sleeves are highlighted in red, as you can see, but okay, sorry. By the way, I moved the wheel eyes. That happens quite often. Now I'll press cancel to undo all the changes. Okay. So this implant of mine has shifted. Yes. By the way, I just got caught by this thing where at a certain stage, when you move the wheel, your implant shifts, you just misclick, and that's it. So now you'll also know that this can happen. Now we'll reposition the implants and so on and so forth. All right, everything's okay. What? Yes, I also wanted to say something about the placement of the implants. You can move the implants at a certain stage before creating the template for the implants. But if you've already made the template for the fixation pins, you, under no circumstances, can you move those fixation pins anymore. For obvious reasons, because if you make a template for these fixation pins and then you move the fixation pins to the left or right, then the holes won't line up and nothing will work. Yes, by the way, to avoid accidentally moving anything, you can first of all save the project. And you can also use these fixation pins. There's a cool feature here where you click on this little lock icon. And by clicking this lock icon, you lock these fixation pins. So for example, if I now try to move it, you see I can't move it anywhere anymore. And secondly, even if I want to delete it, I won't be able to because I've locked it. There you go. You can do the same thing with implants as well. If you found the perfect spot for an implant and don't want it to move accidentally. Okay, let's get back to what we were doing. Let me remind you, we were placing sleeves. We click on RealGuide. Now I'll raise it a bit so there's some space between the bone and the sleeve. Here my sleeve is highlighted in red. It's highlighted in red because there's a collision with the anatomy. Even though I kind of hid it from the visual field in the program, the anatomical model hasn't gone anywhere. Here it is. By the way, if needed, you can, for example, delete it since we don't need it anymore. And as you can see, the error disappears. So now implant 3, 4. At this stage, you need to make sure that there's no collision or intersection with the bone. Here, I actually do have one, even though the sleeve is highlighted in green, to be precise. Right. If you want the program to warn you, for example, if you want it to notify you when the sleeve touches the bone, you can label the lower jaw here as, say, N anatomy as well, meaning you make it an anatomical model too. And accordingly, the program will warn you that there is a collision that is an intersection with this model. In other words, with the segmented lower jaw. We're going to do all of this now. By the way, yes, there's also this helpful feature where you don't have to exit and then re-enter the program every single time like I just did a moment ago. You can actually switch between the different implants using these arrows right here, and it switches in the exact order in which you originally placed the implants. All right, let's check carefully. Did we place all of them? Yes, this one here is still, this particular implant is still without a sleeve. So now let's see what we have here. So actually, for the people who come to these walls, and for you as well, I'll talk about segmentation in general, about working on these kinds of segmented jaws, that is working with bone. According to some authors, and you've probably noticed this in your own practice, of course, we trust computed tomography and base all our calculations on it. But according to some authors who specialize in radiology, the margin of error in computed tomography can vary both upwards and downwards. And this margin of error can reach up to 1.5 millimeters. So what does this mean? It means you've obtained some kind of 3D image, right? Based on that, the RealGuide software segmented the jaw or segmented something else. It doesn't matter, not necessarily the jaw. It could be anything. So the actual size, in other words, for the patient, this model can be up to 1.5 millimeters smaller or 1.5 millimeters larger. This is due to the margin of error in computed tomography. Computed tomography is not a scan. It uses X-rays, which, for example, can be affected by metal present in the oral cavity, errors in the form of noise, and so on and so forth. That's why the 3D image you get is not always accurate. Plus, segmentation sometimes doesn't work very well, because let me try to show you here. If you pay attention, it looks like there are no walls here on the vestibular side. This is because the walls here are very, very thin, and in fact the image just merges together with the root. That's why here we need to take certain steps to protect ourselves from improper seating. Very often bone-supported guides don't fit properly for this reason. The first thing we need to do is, first of all, slightly raise the sleeves above the bone surface. Here in the area of 4 and 6, everything is fine. Here I would raise it, well, by about, let's raise it maybe by 3 millimeters. Wait, no. Actually by 8, because we're adding a 3 millimeter offset. No, 8 is probably too much. Well, although, let's, okay, leave 6 and 5. So why 6 and 5? Because the standard offset here was 5 millimeters. The next drill bit in RealGuide after the 10 millimeter drill is 11.5 millimeters. 11.5 minus 10 is 1.5, and 1.5 plus 5 makes 6.5. Okay? Here, let's raise it by 1 millimeter. Here, probably also by 1 millimeter. Why? Because here we have a 12 millimeter implant and the drill is 13 millimeters. So we compensate for this height difference. Everything's okay. And now let's work here as well. Well, here I think we actually need to raise it by 3 millimeters. And what do we have here? Everything is fine here. That's it. And now we can already create a surgical guide based on the bone. Here the program asks us whether to edit the existing guide. Let me remind you that we made a guide for pin fixation, but now we need to make a new guide. And now, since we have already removed the anatomical model from the project, we need to set the main model as this mandible, that is the lower jaw. We click Set Insert Direction from View, meaning we set the insertion path as needed, and then we click Generate Undercut. So here we need to do a few things. First, we need to paint over these sleeves. Oh, sorry, not sleeve sockets. We need to paint over all of this. Why? Because if we don't do this, the program will try to fill these sockets with the template's plastic. Well, you can experiment and see what happens. That is, it will fill them in the shape of roots. There you go. By the way, some people use this feature as a way to fix the template in place, but I don't recommend doing that. It's very inaccurate. There you go. After you've filled in all the sleeves, we need to remember the rule that a CT scan has a margin of error. That's why there's a tool here called Offset by Brush. Offset by Brush is a tool that we usually use to coat excuse the slang, the template model, or rather the segmented lower jaw model. We coat it, and wherever we apply it, the program will create a gap equal to the offset value we've set. Here, I currently have it set to 1.24, but generally you shouldn't make it less than 1 millimeter. Why is this necessary? Yes, your template will be slightly separated, most likely, from the bone by literally 1 millimeter. This will not affect the fit in any way, nor will it impact any of its strength characteristics or the balance, but it will protect you specifically from CT scan inaccuracies, because a very common problem with bone-supported templates is that they don't fit properly. So we click on Offset. Now the program will take a moment to process, because it needs some time to render the entire model, since the volume is actually quite large. That is, it raises each point that we select by 1.5 millimeters. That's it. And now we can see what we've got. So locally, this model that we made, that we worked on, has grown a little bit. Now we don't turn anything off here, because we need everything, and we start drawing the template boundary. I wouldn't advise going over to the lingual side here so strongly, because it's quite difficult and dangerous to stand up from the lingual side. it's better to separate from the vestibular side. And this is roughly what we end up with. Now we'll hide this. Again, we refine all of this main part, whatever is sticking out. Yes, quick comment. You see, in my case, the sleeve is sticking out a little. In principle, you can leave it like that. That's it. Why? Because it's actually resting against the offset we created. So in fact, this part won't be pressing against the mucosa. If we had a template on the mucosa, it would be different. Right now, our template will be kind of floating a bit above the bone. But if you're a real perfectionist, you can go back to the previous step, increase the offset even more, and then everything will be just right. For now, we won't bother with that. We'll just mention it. And now, as we've already discussed, we add resin in the critically important areas. Here, we definitely need to add resin in the area of the fixation pins. We can also remove this excess part here. Well, not exactly remove, more like smooth it out. That would be a more accurate way to put it, because it doesn't serve any purpose, and on the contrary, it will just make us wait even longer. Although, in any case, the procedure itself will already be quite, well, traumatic, I would say. Because all these things related to on-bone fixation of templates require thorough tissue detachment. Although, on the other hand, if we're talking about a full arch case, reductions are often performed there anyway, so you still have to detach the tissue. It's just a matter of whether someone knows how to do the detachment or not. All right, okay. We also added reinforcement ribs between the sleeves. Everything is good, and here as well we usually add them because templates sometimes break here too. We click next step, and now what I wanted to show you is precisely this section. So you can see that there is a certain distance between the bone and the template. The template will be supported by these 3 fixation pins, and this bone here, more precisely, the template definitely won't press against the bone. Even if there is some inaccuracy, the template will most likely fit properly. Because believe me, if your template doesn't fit onto the bone, meaning you've extracted the teeth, and the template doesn't fit, it's very difficult during surgery to figure out where the template isn't sitting properly, where you need to trim, and so on. So how will the surgery proceed? Let me take a moment to remove this so we can see more clear now. As you can observe, we have these teeth right here in front of us, which are the ones I want to focus on for now. Do you see how they are positioned? We'll use them to position this dental template with 2 fixation pins. Next, the teeth will be extracted, exposing the bone, like this. And then the surgical guides for preparing the bone beds for the implants will be placed. Here, yes, I'd like to make a slight adjustment. There's also an important point I'd like to mention regarding this whole process, especially concerning the lower jaw and working with the bone in general. Be sure to also check the exit of the mental foramen. When you work with these guides, with this type of guide, it should also, basically, the guide should never touch the exit of the mental foramen. So, dear friends, our guides are ready for export. Thank you very much for your attention. Please share this video. Give it a like. I hope you found it useful. Bye-bye. See you next time.